Greetings everyone, my name is Nathaniel and I work for the geospatial team here at Trimble. In today's video, we're going to do a quick breakdown of the R780-2 LE so that way you are able to understand what all the equipment does and how to utilize it. To begin this video, let's first talk about the 2 GNSS receiver that you'll be receiving with your kit. Now, with your kit, both GNSS receiver can behave as a base or as a rover. So to begin, let's do a breakdown of the receiver itself and how it functions. Let's talk about the batteries for the GNSS receiver. To be able to insert the battery inside of the GNSS receiver, you will simply open the gate in front of it by pushing down on this button, and the latch for it will be able to open. Whenever you are inserting the battery, you want to make sure that the slot at the top of it faces upward, and additionally you will notice 2 golden pins. When you are inserting the batteries, you want to make sure that the golden pins are facing towards the receiver, and once you do, you simply insert the battery inside and you close shut the gate, which we will be able to hear a noise whenever you close it. And just like that, you have the battery inserted inside of the receiver. Let's talk about the antenna now. To insert the antenna, it is quite straightforward. You will notice 2 plugs underneath the receiver. The one for the antenna is the one with the black plug. To remove the plug, you simply unscrew the cap, and once your cap is removed, you will then be able to see where the antenna is going to be screwed on. As you screw on the antenna, you do want to keep in mind that you want to make sure that it is snug, but not too tight to the point that it would strip the threads. And just like that, your antenna is installed. Now that the battery is inserted and the radio antenna is installed, let's talk about how to turn on the receiver. It is quite straightforward. You simply press the power on button. Now, once the receiver is turned on, you will see that the lights will be turned on. Now, here at the bottom right, it is your battery indicator. One thing to keep in mind is whenever that battery indicator is flashing, it means that there's 15% or less in your battery. At the bottom left, this is your Wi-Fi indicator. At the top left, this is your satellite indicator. And at the top right, this is your radio indicator. Now, if at any point any of these lights are off, it simply means that it is not receiving a signal. Now, of course, at the moment, the satellite indicator is off as I'm currently inside of a building. And then once you are done throughout the day and you want to shut off your receiver, all you do is you press the power button for 3 seconds or less. And once that is done, you will see that all the LED indicators will be turned off. Now, if you ever encounter any issues with your receiver and you would like to learn about the different light indicator and the patterns for it, please consult our website. There's a dedicated webpage which explains all the different meanings in regards to the flashing patterns, if it's going fast or slow, as to what it means. Now, let us say you had a long day at work and your battery dies. How do you actually charge your battery? Let me show you that. Now, to take out the battery, this is simply the opposite way of how you would have had entered it. You simply press down on this button, open up the latch, and you will be able to retrieve the battery out of it. Now, one thing to keep in mind is make sure to close back the gate just to keep any external debris from the battery casing. Now, with your charging kit, you will notice 3 components to it. One is the battery charging dock, and then afterwards, 2 cable pieces. Now, with this cable, you will be simply taking this and inserting it inside of your other cable piece. Once it is inserted, you will take this end and plug it inside of your charging dock. Make sure that it is fully seated inside of it. And afterwards, with any other electronic apparels, you'll be pulling that into the outlet. With your charging dock ready, you will notice that there is a red light indicator at the front of it. This simply means that your battery is not charging, which of course, as at the moment, it is currently not inserted. As earlier, with those 2 golden pins, as you insert the battery inside of it, you want to make sure that those 2 golden pins are facing downward, and you will align this with the slot inside of the charging dock. Once you insert it, make sure to give it a nice firm push. And once it is properly seated, this red LED indicator will go from red to green, indicating that your battery is charging. Now, I would just like to answer some general battery questions that you may have. At the moment, as you can see, the green LED indicator is flashing. This means that the battery is still charging. However, once that green LED indicator becomes static, This simply indicates that your battery is fully charged and ready to be used. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, yes, you can leave these batteries charging overnight. The device will ensure to not overcharge the battery and to ensure that the battery health stays as healthy as long as possible. Now, if you would like to ever troubleshoot any of these LED indicators, we do have a dedicated website page which gives some further details in regards to these LED indicators and what they also mean. Now that you understand how to power on and power off the receiver and what all the different light indicator means and how to plug in the radio antenna and to charge the batteries for your receiver, let's talk about the receiver firmware in regards to it. Now, when you will first receive your unit, the firmware should already be installed on it. However, if for any XYZ reasons the firmware is not already installed, or if you wish to update the firmware to the most recent one, this is when your LEMO cable comes in handy. This cable plugs directly inside of the GNSS receiver, which then gets plugged inside of your laptop throughout this USB. Now, I will give you a quick demonstration as to how to plug in the cable from the receiver inside your laptop. On your receiver, as shown earlier, you may or may not have noticed that there's two plugs onto it. The other one, to remove the plug, it is simply a pull to remove it. It is not a screw. With your other cable, you will notice on the cable that there is a red dot. If you look closely in the receiver, you will also notice a red dot right here. When plugging this cable, it is very important to align this red dot with the red mark inside of the port of your receiver. Once you go to plug it in, you give it a nice firm push. You want to make sure that it is properly seated. And if you go to pull out of it, you will notice that you are not able to pull it out. This simply means that your cable was properly installed inside of your receiver. Now, with the cable plug inside of your GNSS receiver, all there is left is to plug the cable inside of your laptop. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you're doing a firmware update or installation, please ensure that there is a battery inserted inside of it. If not, your GNSS receiver will not be able to power on. With the GNSS receiver plugged in and power on, let me now show you how to update or install the current firmware of the GNSS receiver. You'll first want to open up the Trimble Installation Manager. Once the Trimble Installation Manager opens up, you'll want to ensure that onto the left side, Receiver is selected. Once Receiver is selected, you'll then go onto the bottom right and click the Connect button. Once you have the Connect button selected, it'll then ask you to select the available connection port, which in our case is the COM3 Trimble USB. Once you click OK, the Trimble Installation Manager will now attempt a connection with your GNSS receiver, as you can see at the top. Once your GNSS receiver is connected, it will then show you this little screen. Once this splash screen opens up, you'll then be able to select the receiver firmware. Please ensure that a checkmark is selected there. Afterwards, you'll then go at the bottom right and click Install. And afterwards, it'll give you two warning messages, so please make sure to press OK on both of them. Please do keep in mind when you install a firmware update, it will erase any memory onto your Trimble GNSS receiver. So if you have any important files, make sure to export those out of your GNSS receiver. Just like that, the firmware is now being installed. This may take a couple of minutes, so please be patient. For the sake of this video, this process was sped up. Additionally, as you can see at the top right, we've chosen to install the latest release, but you could have also selected some previous version. Once you're done, you then click Finish at the bottom right, and just like that, you're ready to rock and roll. With the firmware now installed or updated, it is now time to take this apart. To take it apart, the first thing you will do is turn off your GNSS receiver. Wait until all of the LED indicators are turned off. Once all of those LED indicators are turned off, you can now unplug it from your computer. Once it is unplugged from your computer, you will then remove the cable from the GNSS receiver. Please keep in mind when unplugging this cable, you will need to pull onto this metal filament away from the GNSS receiver. And just like that, you will be able to remove the cable. If you try to pull on it just from the cable itself and not the metal filament, you will not be able to unplug the cable. So please make sure to pull on this metal filament away from the GNSS receiver. With the cable off, please ensure to put the cap back inside, and this is super important to keep any debris or water from the port's input. Now, as you store away this cable, please make sure to put this rubber cap back on top of it. As previously mentioned, this cable is very fragile. If any debris or water gets inside of it, it may corrode or break the cable. make sure to put this cap back on the cable too before you store this cable away. Now that you understand the basics of the GNSS receiver, we're now going to move on to the next section of the video, which is going to discuss the different pieces of equipment. Now, before that we dive into the different pieces of equipment, I would just like to give a little bit of context. With your GNSS receiver, you can set up in two methods. You can set it up as a base station or as a rover station. Now, when taking measurements with your GNSS receiver, you want to receive some form of corrections. Now, those corrections can come throughout different methods. The first one is simply as a base/rover setup. Now, this is when you have another GNSS receiver sending corrections to your rover setup as you're walking around and taking measurements with it. Another method is also throughout the NTRIP/TCH. What that does is it's pretty much a server that is able to broadcast corrections to you. So how it would work is it would utilize another base, else your own personal base that you would have set up, or using someone else's base that then sends the corrections to NTRIP/TCH, which then communicates those to your receiver or your rover. Now, one last method of corrections is throughout RTX, which utilizes satellites to communicate those corrections to your rover as you're out taking measurements with your rover. Now, for the sake of this video, I will demonstrate you how to set up your GNSS receiver as a base and how to set it up as a rover. For your base setups, there'll be two methods to do it, which I'll then explain further on in this video. So to begin, let's look as to how you can set up your GNSS receiver as a base method. When setting up your GNSS receiver as a base method, you'll have two options. You can all use a rod to hold your base setup, or you can use a triple mag mount that can then be installed onto your car or truck for your base. The first method that we'll look into setting up your base will be with the triple mag mount. The first step that you will do is take your 0.25 meter rod extension, which will then be screwed on top of it. As you're screwing it on, make sure that it's snug, but not too tight to the point that you run the risk of stripping the threads. Next up, you will then take your GNSS receiver, which will then be screwed on top of that 0.25 meter rod extension. And as always, make sure that it's snug, but not too tight to the point that you risk stripping your threads. Now, as you can tell, the 0.25 meter rod extension comes in handy for the sake of the antenna to ensure that it does not poke the car or truck. Now, when setting this up on a car or truck, make sure to find a relatively flat surface on it to have a good anchoring point. Now, do ensure that whenever you are done with the setup to take it apart, make sure to remove it off of your vehicle, or else you run the risk of driving off and this flying off. Now, why would this setup be useful? The setup is useful in situations where it is an emergency and you need to set up a base very quickly. As to compare to the rod setup, the setup is significantly quicker and a lot easier to set up as you simply mount it onto your vehicle. Now, the next method that we'll look at to set up your base is with a two-piece carbon fiber GNSS rod. It is quite straightforward. You will take the top piece, which has the little level bubble. Once you have that top piece, you will then take your GNSS receiver and screw it on top of it. Now, as with anything else that you've been screwed on, make sure that it's snug, but not too tight to the point that you risk stripping your threads. Next up, you will then take your bottom piece of your two-piece GNSS carbon fiber rod, and you will screw it onto the bottom portion of your top piece. With that bottom piece now screwed in, you have your whole assembly completed. However though, how are you going to keep it in place? Now, this is when your bipod comes in handy to keep your rod in steady position. Now, to use your bipod, it is quite straightforward. You will notice a screw on the side. This screw is utilized to clamp the GNSS rod inside of the bipod. And additionally, you'll also notice two buttons that you can press, which then extends your two legs of your bipods. This will be useful to level out your GNSS rod. Now, one thing that I'd like to point out is when setting up the bipod onto the GNSS rod, you will notice here in white that says clamp zone. What this means is you can clamp things within this area. If you clamp anything outside of that area, you run the risk of crushing the GNSS rod, which would not be good. You will then take your bipod, which you would then insert inside. Once it is inserted inside, the first step that you will want to do is to ensure that it is clamped down properly, which is simply done by screwing the screw clockwise. Once the screw is nice and snug, yet again, not too crazy tight, but tight enough to hold the GNSS rod in place with the bipod, the next portion will then be to use the legs. I always like to have the GNSS rod planted firmly into the ground, and afterwards, you will then use the two legs of the bipod to extend them out, and afterwards you drop the legs. Once your legs are dropped down, you'll see that your setup is nice and steady. Now, let us say if you are in dirt or soft ground, make sure to give a nice step on those two legs of your bipods into the ground to make sure that they're well firmly placed. Now, the last thing that you would want to do is to use the level bubble of your GNSS rod to ensure that it is leveled and the center of the level bubble, which I will show you right now. As you can see right here, the little bubble is centered within inside that black circle. Now, before that we move on to how to set up the GNSS receiver as a rover setup, why would you want to use the setup with a GNSS rod? While that the triple mag mount may seem quicker, what is pleasant with the GNSS rod is you can then insert it over a known point onto the ground or a point that you've created. Now, once you have that point created, you would then take your GNSS rod, set it up over that known point or that created point. And afterwards, you go out with your rover, you take your measurements and all of that. And at the end of the day, you pack everything and you leave. However, though, if you would like to come the next day, you could then set up that base setup above that point again, and everything that you would have measured on the previous day would still be geo-reference to that point that you'd have set it up over. Now, let us say if you would have had utilized that triple mag mount setup, ensuring that it is fully centered on the same spot as yesterday would pretty much be rendered as impossible, if not a very challenging task. As always with everything, it simply depends as to what you wish to realize out of it. However, though, it is one thing to be considerate of. Now that you understand how to configure your GNSS receiver as a base setup, we're now going to move on to the next portion of the video, which will discuss how to set up your GNSS receiver as a rover setup. Now, it is quite similar to the base setup, but just a little bit different. Now, as the base setup, you would take your 2 pieces carbon fiber GNSS rod. I personally always like to mount the GNSS receiver while that the 2-piece carbon fiber GNSS rod is disassembled. Now, as the base setup, you want to ensure that your GNSS receiver has the antenna screwed in and that the battery is inserted inside of it. Afterwards, you'll take your other piece, same thing as always, screw these two together. And just like that, your assembly is completed. All you're missing is your data collector. Now, the mount bracket will usually come in 2 pieces. The first component of it is what screws directly onto the carbon fiber GNSS rod. As with the bipod, you want to ensure that it's within the clamping zone. So you then take your device, and afterwards you clamp it onto your GNSS rod. One thing to keep in mind is you want to ensure that your device will be facing the same way as the level bubble. As you're out collecting data, you'll want to look at the level bubble at the same time as the screen. And just like that, we have the mounting bracket assembled. And all you're missing is now the mounting bracket for the device that you'll be collecting data. As you're mounting it onto it, you'll notice that there is a little button at the bottom of it. You simply push on it, and this will allow the silver piece to be able to be inserted inside of it. And you'll know that it's properly seated as it's sitting flush at the back of it. Next up, all you're missing is you simply take your data collector and you simply insert it. Just like that, your rover assembly is ready and ready to go out and collect some data.
Before we do go out though, let me quickly show you how to install the Forensic Capture software. To install the Forensic Capture software, you'll first want to open up the Trimble Installation Manager. If you do not already have this application, please ensure to download it from the App Store. When you first open it up, it'll ensure that Trimble Installation Manager is up to date and get a list of available products that is available for your account. In our case, we have the Forensic Capture software, which you can then select. From there, you'll then be able to activate your license by clicking the install button at the bottom. Once your license is active, it'll then download the Capture Forensic software. Once this download is completed, it'll prompt you if you want to install this application. From there, you'll click the install button, and Forensic Capture will then install onto your personal device. Once the app is installed, you'll then be able to open it onto your mobile device. So as you can see in our case, it now pops up onto our home screen. From there, you then open up the Capture Forensic software. And you simply give it a few seconds. Now, when you first open up the Trimble Forensic Capture, I'll ask you a couple of permissions to have some access to your device, for example, the file, location, camera, and etc. So just make sure to accept all of these, that way the application is able to behave as it should. Afterwards, the application will then check for your license, which from there, it will then prompt you to log into your Trimble account. Once you are logged in, it will then validate your license to ensure that you do have an active license. Now, for the sake of this video, we'll skip this portion for privacy reasons. However though, all you have to do is log into your account. Once you are logged in, you'll then be prompted back onto the application, which will then verify the license. It'll ask you to enter a couple of settings for your capture forensic software, so please make sure to select those properly. Afterwards, you'll then have to read the terms and conditions. Now, for the sake of this video, I will simply scroll throughout real fast, but please do take a second to read through this. Once you're done, you then click at the bottom that you accept and finish. And just like that, you're ready to use the capture forensic software. With the forensic capture software now installed, let's go out in the field so I can show you how to configure the 3 GNSS methods.
Alright, now that we're currently outside, I'm going to show you how to set up these GNSS receiver base/rover configurations. So without waiting, let's open the capture software and set those settings up. So the first thing you're going to want to do is obviously open up the capture software. Once you're inside of the capture software, this is the screen that you'll be welcome to. Now, if you're not already logged in, please do so and ensure that you're already logged into your account. Once you're logged into your account, we're going to create a new project. Now, the name of this project, for the sake of this video, I will simply call it test. Now, for the point code library, if you're already out in the field and you're about to do a scene, these are the different point codes that you can utilize. So they'll come with 3 main libraries, and additionally, you can make your own custom library. For the sake of this video, we'll simply select none, as we won't be collecting any measurements. Afterwards, you'll click at the top right to go on to the next screen. So, as previously mentioned, the input method for the survey is simply going to be GNSS. Afterwards, you will go and then click onto the GNSS configuration. You'll click onto the change. And from there, this is where you'll be able to see the 3 mode that I was talking about. So you have your NTRIP, Base and Rover, and afterwards RTX. As mentioned, for this portion of the video, we'll show you how to set up for Base and Rover. So select Base and Rover. Ensure that both of your GNSS receivers are turned on and that the Bluetooth of your device is also turned on. So for the rover of this setup, we're using the one ending in 6958. And afterwards, you'll select your base, which is going to be the one ending in 7022 for these 2 GNSS receivers. Now, once they have your proper rover and base setup, now do keep in mind, these will have a different serial code for your own personal GNSS receiver. We can now test the configuration. Now give it a couple of seconds as it connects to the rover and base. And just like that, now you're onto the splash screen where it shows you the test configuration information. Now you want to ensure that the base position for the position type uses the SBAS. And then afterwards for the rover position, it will show up originally as SBAS and then in red right next to it saying RTK required. You only need to give it a couple of seconds. Afterwards, your position type will switch over to RTK. Just like that, we've tested our configuration. We know everything's properly working. So we'll back out of this splash screen. And just like that, we can click the blue check mark at the top right. Afterwards, we'll click onto next. And it'll do the same thing as earlier, simply connect to the rover and the base setup and configure the survey. All right, next up, you'll be greeted with the rover target setting. This is very crucial. Now for this GNSS setup, the height of the rod is 2 meters. One thing you want to make sure is the measure to. Make sure to select bottom of antenna mount. What this means is it simply indicates all the way to the bottom of the GNSS receiver is where is the height reference point. So all there is left to measure is the rod itself, which in this case is 2 meters. Now, if you're uncertain, I highly recommend, as previously mentioned, taking a measuring tape, measuring the GNSS rod, ensuring that it is the proper height measurement. Now, for this sake, it's 2 meters, as I already know in regards to it. So we'll move on to the next screen. So, for the context of this survey, we are going to pick the center of this basketball court. Whenever you're ready, you'll click at the top right, which will then take a measurement. Make sure your rod is plumb by using the level bubble. Afterwards, you give it 10 seconds for it to take the measurement. And just like that, your initial point is finally recorded. Now you'll be setting up your 2 GNSS control point. So we're going to begin with the first one. So for the sake of this survey, we're simply going to use the 2 corners of the center of this basketball court. Now in theory, if you were actually out in a survey, you would else take some spray paint and afterwards make a mark on the ground or indicate any form of way where you could come back to that point to then set up back over it. So as mentioned, for the sake of the survey, we'll simply take the 2 corners over here. Once you're ready, you'll click at the top right to record the points, and yet again, you'll have to hold it plumb for 10 seconds. And just like that, you have your first GNSS point recorded, so we'll click onto next. And afterwards, this is when you'll be doing your second GNSS control point, which as mentioned, we'll just take the other corner here. And you'll do the same thing, take your measurement and ensure your rod is plumb by using the level bubble. And now your second point is now recorded. And just like that, you are now ready to start your survey. So now that you have your base and rover configuration completed, we're now going to move on to the next portion of the video, which is going to discuss how to set it up with the NTRIP/TCH mode. So, same thing as earlier, you'll create yourself a new project. Yet again, for the context of this video, I'm simply going to call it test. And as mentioned as earlier, if you wanted to use a point code library, this is where you would select it. But yet again, for this survey, we're not going to select any. So click at the top right for the next arrow. Now, yet again, this is where you'll click your blue button for change. Now, as you'll see, it'll still be pre-selected as base/rover. So this is where you'll go and then select NTRIP. Now, I already have a NTRIP server already pre-selected, but just for the sake of showing you, if I click new as it connects to the rover, brilliant. This is where you'll be able to enter the NTRIP server information. So you can create a name scheme for it, you can name it whatever you wish. Afterwards, you would enter the address, port, user, and password. And then from there, you would then download your NTRIP table. And afterwards, you would test your configuration. Now, for the sake of this video, as I've already mentioned, this is where we'll go and then pre-select the one that I already have selected. I'm not going to show the information in regards to it, as that's private information. Once we're done, we're going to click the check mark onto it. Now, one thing I would like to mention is whenever you're using the NTRIP/TCH, you'll need some form of cellular network connection or just Wi-Fi, just any form of connection where you're able to connect to the network. Which we're now going to hotspot. Now that I now have a cellular network connected to this device, we can now click at the top right to go to the next page. Now, as earlier, it was now going to connect to the rover and afterwards connect to the NTRIP/TCH server. Now, as you've seen, it has successfully connected. In a situation where it would have not been able to connect, it would have simply said failed or some form of warning message. So all you have to do is go back into the setting and ensure that you have the proper one inserted. So same thing as earlier, ensures that it is measured to the bottom of the antenna mount and that the target height being the GNSS carbon fiber rod pole is 2 meters. So you'll now click on to next. Now this is where you'll do a similar setup as earlier, so you'll do your initial points in case that later on you ever want to do a base/rover configuration. So you'll take your measurement, ensure that your GNSS carbon fiber rod pole is plumb for 10 seconds. And just like that, we have our first original point store. We're now going to move to our first GNSS control point, so we'll just pick the same one as earlier. And just like that, we'll take our 10-second measurement, ensure that you are plumb. And we now have our first GNSS control point stored, so we'll do our second one. And yet again, you'll keep your GNSS carbon fiber rod pole plumb for 10 seconds. And we're going to store that. And just like that, your setup is now complete. And all there is left to do is you click that check mark, and you'll now be ready to go out and collect some points. So now that you understand how to connect to the NTRIP/TCH server to use a virtual-based network, we're now going to do the last option, which is using RTX throughout the satellites. Awesome, we're now on our last configuration, which is the RTX method. Oh, hey there, buddy. Anywho, we're going to go and create a new project, as mentioned as earlier. And yet again, for the context of this video, we are simply going to call it test. Now, if you want to select a point code library, this is where you'll be able to select one, but yet again, for this context of the video, we won't bother selecting any. Now, yet again, you will click the blue button titled Change, and from there, this is where you will be able to select the RTX mode. Now, as always, ensure that your rover is the proper one, which for this one is the proper one. Now, you can then test your configuration. Now, just for the context of this video, this GNSS receiver does not have a RTX subscription. So what this means is this GNSS receiver cannot utilize the RTX satellites to receive corrections. However though, in your case, just ensure that you have a subscription selected for it and that you're paying for it, and you'll have access to the RTX network. Now, just to simulate an example where you wanted to check whether you do have one or not, if I were to select the blue checkmark arrow and afterwards click next, it'll try to connect to the GNSS rover, which it'll do, but the moment that it tries to start the RTX survey, it'll simply say failed. Now, if you did have RTX, it would simply go on to the next splash screen. You'd set up your 3 points as what we would have had done for the NTRIP/TCH server, and afterwards you'd be ready to rock and roll on your survey. And just like that, this wraps up your 3 method as to how to set up these GNSS receiver for your 3 configuration, being Base/rover, NTRIP/TCH, which uses a virtual base network, or at last RTX. Now we'll go back inside for the conclusion. And just like that, this wraps up our quick breakdown tutorial of how to use the R780-2 LE GNSS receiver with the forensic capture software. As always, Trimble sincerely thanks you for using our equipment, and we sincerely hope that it makes your life easier and a lot more efficient to perform your work, and most importantly, as safe as possible. Now, if you still have any questions in regards to your equipment, please do not hesitate to reach out to the Trimble Forensic team at the following email: forensics_support@trimble.com. And on that note, thanks a lot for watching.